The email that would destroy everything sat in my drafts folder for exactly 47 days. I know because I counted every single one while I planned my revenge. But let me start from the beginning, because the real story isn't about the email. It's about how Marcus Sullivan, CFO of Meridian Financial Solutions, made the biggest mistake of his career when he decided to fire me 3 days before my bonus was due. My name is Catherine Blake, and I used to be the senior financial analyst at Meridian Financial Solutions. Used to be, because 47 days ago, I was escorted out of the building like a common criminal, my badge deactivated, my access revoked, and my career seemingly over. What Marcus didn't know is that I'd been preparing for this moment longer than he'd been planning to get rid of me. The morning it happened started like any other Tuesday. I arrived at our downtown offices at 7:30 a.m., grabbed my usual coffee from the lobby cafe, and settled into my corner cubicle on the 15th floor. The New York skyline stretched before me through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and I remember thinking how beautiful the city looked in the early morning light. I had no idea it would be the last time I'd see that view as an employee. I'd been with Meridian for 6 years, working my way up from a junior analyst to one of the most trusted members of the finance team. My performance reviews were stellar, my work was impeccable, and my $80,000 annual bonus was not just expected, it was earned. I'd spent the last quarter working 16-hour days on the Henderson acquisition, a deal that would net the company over $200 million in revenue. My financial modeling had been crucial to making that deal happen. But Marcus Sullivan had other plans. At 10:15 a.m., I received a calendar invite for an urgent meeting with Marcus and HR Director Helen Martinez. The subject line read simply, "Discussion." My stomach dropped. In 6 years at Meridian, I'd learned that when Marcus wanted to have a discussion, it never ended well for the other party. I walked into the conference room to find Marcus seated at the head of the table, his perfectly pressed suit and slicked-back hair giving him the appearance of a shark in expensive clothing. Helen sat to his right, her laptop open and fingers poised over the keyboard like she was preparing to document my execution. "Catherine, please sit," Marcus said, his voice carrying that false warmth that made my skin crawl. "We need to discuss some concerns that have come to our attention." I sat, my hands folded in my lap, waiting for the axe to fall. "It's come to our attention that there have been some irregularities in your recent work," Marcus continued, sliding a folder across the table. "Specifically, regarding the Henderson acquisition analysis." I opened the folder to find printouts of my financial models, but something was wrong. Numbers had been altered, formulas had been changed, and several critical assumptions had been modified to make the projections look far more optimistic than they actually were. "This isn't my work," I said, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. "These numbers have been changed." Marcus exchanged a look with Helen before responding. "Catherine, I understand this is difficult, but we have documentation showing these models came from your computer, using your login credentials, at times when you were the only one in the office." "That's impossible," I said. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew exactly what had happened. Marcus had access to everyone's login information through his administrative privileges. He'd been planning this for weeks, maybe months. "I'm sorry, Catherine, but given the severity of these irregularities and the potential impact on our client relationships, we have no choice but to terminate your employment immediately." The words hit me like a physical blow. 6 years of dedication, of late nights and weekend work, of missing family gatherings and sacrificing my personal life for this company. And it was ending because Marcus Sullivan needed a scapegoat. "My bonus," I managed to say. "It's due this Friday." Marcus's smile was cold. "I'm afraid that given the circumstances, your bonus will not be paid. In fact, we're considering whether to pursue legal action for the damage your errors may have caused." That's when I knew with absolute certainty that this wasn't about irregular work or honest mistakes. This was about Marcus covering his own tracks, and I was the convenient fall guy. But Marcus had made one crucial error in his plan. He assumed I was just another employee who would quietly disappear, taking my severance package and signing a non-disclosure agreement to keep quiet about what really happened. He didn't know that I'd been watching him for months, documenting every questionable decision, every ethical compromise, every corner he'd cut in pursuit of his own advancement, and he definitely didn't know about the email. 3 months earlier, I'd been working late on a quarterly report when I noticed something odd in the expense accounts. Large sums of money were being moved between departments in ways that didn't make sense, and the documentation was either missing or deliberately vague. I started digging deeper, staying later, accessing files that technically fell within my purview but were clearly intended to remain hidden. What I found was a systematic scheme to inflate the company's earnings through fraudulent accounting practices. Marcus had been manipulating revenue recognition, hiding losses in subsidiary accounts, and using shell companies to create the appearance of growth where none existed. The Henderson acquisition wasn't just about expanding Meridian's portfolio, it was about using the influx of capital to cover up years of financial misconduct. The email I'd drafted but never sent contained a detailed breakdown of Marcus's scheme, complete with documentation, account numbers, and a timeline of fraudulent activities. I'd been planning to send it to the SEC, but I'd hesitated, hoping to find a way to address the issues internally first. I believed in the company, believed that someone in leadership would do the right thing if they knew what was happening. How naive I'd been. As security escorted me from the building, my personal items hastily packed into a cardboard box. I felt the weight of the USB drive in my jacket pocket. I'd been backing up my research for months, creating copies of every document, every email, every piece of evidence that proved Marcus's guilt. The company might have revoked my access, but they couldn't erase what I'd already preserved. That night, I sat in my apartment, staring at my laptop screen. The email was still there in my drafts folder, waiting. All I had to do was add the attachments and hit send. But I didn't. Not yet. If I was going to destroy Marcus Sullivan, I was going to do it properly. Over the next few weeks, I expanded my investigation. I reached out to former colleagues who'd left Meridian under mysterious circumstances, and I began to see a pattern. Marcus had been eliminating anyone who got too close to his scheme, manufacturing reasons to fire them, or making their work environment so hostile that they chose to leave. I contacted Jennifer Walsh, a former senior accountant who'd been let go 2 years earlier for performance issues. When I explained what I'd discovered, she broke down crying over the phone. I knew something was wrong, she said. I tried to raise concerns about the revenue recognition policies, but Marcus shut me down. Then suddenly I was getting written up for minor mistakes. And within 3 months, I was gone. The same story repeated itself with David Chen, a former internal auditor, and Patricia Williams, who'd been the head of compliance before Marcus had her position eliminated entirely. Each of them had noticed pieces of the puzzle, and each had been systematically removed before they could see the full picture. But I was different. I wasn't just going to disappear quietly into the night. I was going to make sure Marcus Sullivan paid for what he'd done, not just to me, but to every employee he'd betrayed and every shareholder he'd defrauded. The break I'd been waiting for came 6 weeks after my termination. I was having coffee with my former colleague Maria Santos, one of the few people at Meridian who'd remained friendly after my firing, when she mentioned something that made my blood run cold. They're planning to announce record quarterly earnings next week, she said. Marcus has been in meetings all week with the external auditors, and apparently, the numbers are incredible. He's already talking about a company-wide celebration. I knew those numbers were fraudulent. I'd seen the real financial data, and Meridian was barely breaking even. If Marcus was about to announce record earnings to shareholders and the SEC, he was crossing a line that would transform his scheme from corporate misconduct into securities fraud. That night, I finalized my email. I included every document, every piece of evidence, every smoking gun that proved Marcus's guilt, but I didn't send it to the SEC. Instead, I sent it to someone who would be even more motivated to act, Thomas Brennan, the CEO of Meridian Financial Solutions. Thomas had been with the company for 15 years, building it from a small regional firm into a national powerhouse. His reputation was impeccable, and his integrity was never questioned. If anyone would be horrified by Marcus's actions, it would be Thomas. I sent the email on Thursday night, timing it to arrive in Thomas's inbox first thing Friday morning, just hours before Marcus's planned earnings announcement. The subject line read, "Urgent. Fraudulent financial practices requiring immediate attention." But I didn't stop there. I also prepared copies of the email for the SEC, the FBI's white-collar crime division, and 3 major financial journalists who specialized in corporate fraud. I scheduled them all to send Monday morning, giving Thomas the weekend to handle the situation internally if he chose to do so. Friday morning, I sat in my apartment, watching the stock ticker on my laptop. Meridian's stock price had opened strong, buoyed by rumors of the upcoming earnings announcement. At 10 a.m., trading was halted pending a company announcement. At 10:30, the announcement came. Meridian Financial Solutions postpones earnings release pending internal review. The stock price plummeted over the weekend. I watched the news coverage with a mixture of satisfaction and anxiety. Financial analysts were speculating about what could have caused such a sudden reversal. And Meridian stock continued to fall in after-hours trading. Monday morning brought vindication. At 8 a.m., the SEC announced that it was opening an investigation into Meridian Financial Solutions based on credible allegations of securities fraud. An hour later, the FBI raided Meridian's offices, seizing computers and documents. By noon, Marcus Sullivan had been arrested. The news coverage was extensive. Every major financial publication covered the story of how one of Wall Street's rising stars had been brought down by his own greed. The details of the fraud were staggering. Marcus had been manipulating earnings for 3 years, inflating revenue by over $150 million, and hiding losses of nearly $50 million. But the most satisfying moment came when I saw the perp walk. Marcus Sullivan, the man who'd destroyed my career and stolen my bonus, was led out of the federal building in handcuffs. His expensive suit wrinkled and his hair disheveled. The cameras captured every moment of his humiliation. And I watched the footage over and over again. Thomas Brennan held a press conference that afternoon, announcing that the company was cooperating fully with the investigation and that all employees affected by Marcus's scheme would be compensated. He also announced that Meridian was implementing new oversight procedures to prevent such fraud in the future. 3 days later, I received a phone call from Thomas himself. "Catherine," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "I want to apologize personally for what happened to you. I had no idea about Marcus's activities, and I'm horrified that you were victimized twice, once by his fraud and again by his attempt to cover it up." "Thank you, Thomas," I replied, trying to keep the satisfaction out of my voice. "I'd like to offer you your job back, along with your full bonus and additional compensation for the trauma you've endured. We need people with your integrity on our team, now more than ever." I paused, considering the offer. 6 weeks ago, I would have jumped at the chance to return to Meridian. But now, having seen how easily one corrupt executive could poison an entire organization, I had different plans. "I appreciate the offer, Thomas, but I've decided to start my own consulting firm. I'll be specializing in forensic accounting and corporate fraud prevention." "I understand," Thomas said. "If you ever need a reference, please don't hesitate to call." The final chapter of my revenge came 6 months later. Marcus Sullivan pled guilty to securities fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering. He was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $47 million in restitution. His assets were seized, his reputation destroyed, and his career in finance permanently ended. But for me, the best revenge wasn't watching Marcus get carted off to prison. It was the success of my new business. Within 6 months, I had contracts with 3 major corporations to review their financial practices and implement fraud prevention measures. The Meridian case had made me something of a celebrity in the forensic accounting world, and companies were eager to hire someone who'd proven capable of uncovering even the most sophisticated fraud schemes. I often think about that moment in the conference room when Marcus fired me, so confident in his plan to make me disappear. He thought he was eliminating a threat, but what he'd really done was create his own worst nightmare, someone with nothing to lose and everything to gain from exposing his crimes. The irony wasn't lost on me that the bonus he'd stolen from me was nothing compared to the money I was now making as an independent consultant. My first year in business, I earned 3 times what I'd made at Meridian, and my client base was growing every month. But money wasn't the real victory. The real victory was knowing that I'd protected future employees from Marcus's predatory behavior, that I'd saved shareholders from further fraud, and that I'd proven that sometimes the little guy really can take down the corrupt system. I still have that original email in my drafts folder, though I've never deleted it. Sometimes, late at night, I'll open it and read through the careful documentation of Marcus's crimes. It serves as a reminder that patience and preparation are more powerful than anger and impulse. Marcus Sullivan learned the hard way that you should never underestimate the person you're trying to destroy. He thought he was firing a troublesome employee, but what he'd really done was create his own personal nemesis, someone who would stop at nothing to see justice done. The email that destroyed his career sat in my drafts folder for exactly 47 days. But the revenge that followed lasted much longer than that. It lasted for the rest of his life. 6 years later, I'm still running my consulting firm, and business has never been better. I've helped expose fraud at dozens of companies, saved investors millions of dollars, and built a reputation as one of the most thorough forensic accountants in the industry. Marcus Sullivan is still in prison, serving his sentence at a minimum security facility in Pennsylvania. According to the latest reports, he's been working in the prison library, helping other inmates with their legal paperwork. It's a fitting end for someone who spent his career manipulating financial documents. Now he's helping people fill out forms for appeals he knows will never be successful. Sometimes people ask me if I feel bad about what happened to Marcus, if I ever regret sending that email. The answer is simple. Not for a single second. He made his choices, and I made mine. The only difference is that my choices were legal, ethical, and justified. The truth is, Marcus Sullivan destroyed his own life the moment he decided to commit fraud. I just helped speed up the process. And that $80,000 bonus he stole from me. Well, let's just say that the consulting fees I've earned from the companies seeking to avoid their own Meridian-style scandals have more than made up for it. Sometimes the best revenge really is living well, and making sure the people who wronged you face the consequences of their actions. The most satisfying part of the whole experience was realizing that I'd been preparing for this moment my entire career without knowing it. All those late nights studying financial regulations, all those hours spent learning about fraud detection, all those skills I developed in forensic accounting, they'd all been leading to this moment when I could use them to take down someone who thought he was untouchable. Marcus Sullivan fired me 3 days before my bonus was due. But in the end, that firing was the best thing that ever happened to me. It freed me to become who I was meant to be, to build the career I was meant to have, and to ensure that justice was served. The email that ended the CFO's career was just the beginning of my story. The real story is what came after: the success, the satisfaction, and the knowledge that sometimes, if you're patient enough and smart enough, you really can get the last laugh. And trust me, I'm still laughing.